The crowd laughed like it was the funniest thing they'd heard all night. My stomach knotted the second I saw Marcus's face. He froze, still holding the little paper tray of sliders, eyes locked on me. That flicker of hurt in his expression wasn't subtle. It was sharp, like a blade. It was supposed to be my night. The Portland Vintage Moto Expo, strung up in warm lights, local craft beer flowing, rows of chrome and leather gleaming under the tent. My name, Owen Sharp, was on the program in bold print. I was 46, a custom motorcycle designer with a national following, and I knew how to work a room. Tonight, I was the showman. Handshakes, grins, stories about long road trips, and one-of-a-kind builds. Then I saw Marcus, my husband in his black apron, hair tied back, manning the little food truck we co-owned. Technically. I barely thought about it. My mind was on the bikes, the magazine editors, the sponsorship reps. But when I spotted him in the crowd, something smug slipped out before I could reel it in. I grabbed the mic from the DJ, voice booming over the speakers. Give it up for my gourmet grease monkey, serving up snacks and sacrifice since 2012. Laughter rippled through the expo floor. A couple guys slapped my shoulder like I'd just landed the perfect punchline. I kept smiling, but inside, the second I said it, I felt the drop. Marcus didn't laugh. He didn't even try to play along. He just stood there, paper tray in hand, while the chuckles faded into that awkward in-between hum. Then he walked up to the counter, set the sliders down, and said, loud enough for the people in line to hear, "Serve your own damn sliders." The air shifted. Conversations faltered. Somebody coughed. Marcus untied his apron, tossed it on the counter, and walked straight out under the strings of lights. For a beat, I just stood there with the mic in my hand, the weight of 100 eyes pressing in. A woman near the front shifted uncomfortably. One of my crew avoided my gaze, suddenly fascinated by his beer. I handed the mic back to the DJ like it was hot to the touch. Enjoy the show," I mumbled, but the mood was already gone. The buzz that had been carrying the night, the easy flow of people, the hum of conversation, flattened. I tried to rally, to get back into my rounds, but the energy had bled out of the room. A couple people made polite excuses and left. The sponsorship rep I'd been courting all month gave me a tight smile and ducked out early. By the time I got back to the lineup of bikes, the expo floor felt twice as big and half as full. The sliders were still sitting on the counter of the truck, cooling under the yellow light. I didn't touch them. I didn't go straight home after the expo. I drove around aimlessly, the city light smearing through the windshield, trying to shake off the way Marcus had walked out without looking back. But when I finally pulled into my driveway, killed the engine, and stepped inside, I didn't see my house. I saw my father's. It smelled like motor oil and bleach. Always did. Every Saturday morning, without fail, my father had me outside before the sun was up, washing down the family Buick until it reflected the clouds. He was a retired Navy mechanic, and our house ran like a ship, every screw tight, every bed corner sharp enough to cut your hand. There was no good enough. You either did it perfectly, or you started over. If I left a streak on the windshield, he'd run a finger along it, show me the line, and tell me to do the whole car again. If I hesitated when he told me to hand him a tool, he'd bark, "Move with purpose, son." The one thing you never did around him was cry. Crying got you a stare so cold it froze you where you stood, followed by a lecture on what a real man does. So I learned. I kept my voice steady, my face flat, my hands busy. I learned that control was currency. Competence got you a nod, and a nod was the closest thing to affection my father gave. By the time I hit college, I was wound so tight, I didn't even notice how stiff I'd become. Then I met Marcus. He was impossible to miss. A theater major who'd switched to culinary school because he liked the drama of a good plate. He moved through the world like nothing could bruise him, all open hands and easy laughs. The first time I saw him on stage, he was lit up from the inside, saying lines I didn't care about in a way that made me care anyway. We were an odd match from the start. He was chaos with a smile. I was order with a checklist. But he leaned into my drive, and I leaned into his calm. When I opened my first shop, he'd bring me sandwiches and sit on the counter while I worked late, telling stories about the customers at the cafe where he waited tables. Then, we had Naomi. 2 years later, Finn. Marcus stepped into the role of stay-at-home parent like he was born for it, baking cookies for school fundraisers, turning the living room into a pirate ship on rainy days. I was there in the mornings and at bedtime, but my mind was always 3 steps ahead. The next build, the next client, the next magazine spread. Every time Marcus hinted that the kids missed me, I'd brush his arm and say, "This is for us, for them." And I believed it. Every 14-hour day, every weekend in the shop, it was all to secure the life my father would have called respectable. But somewhere along the way, for us, turned into for me, and I didn't even notice. Marcus kept the home running without complaint, but the quiet between us stretched. Naomi grew into a teenager with opinions I didn't hear about until Marcus mentioned them in passing. Finn stopped asking if I could come to his games. He just assumed I couldn't. And me? I told myself it was fine. That's what my father would have said. You provide, you protect, you keep moving. Feelings slow you down. Looking back, I should have seen it. How my grip on control was slowly strangling the very thing I thought I was building. But I didn't. Not until Marcus started looking at me the way I used to look at my father. And that's when the cracks started showing. The shop was dark when I finally locked up. I'd spent the whole day buried in a frame rebuild, avoiding my phone, avoiding the memory of Marcus's face at the expo. By the time I pulled into the driveway, the house was quiet. That late night, walls soak up the silence kind of quiet. Marcus was in the kitchen, leaning against the counter, one hand wrapped around a half-empty glass of whiskey, the other tapping against his thigh. He didn't look up right away. "Hey," I said, dropping my keys in the bowl. "Naomi had her recital tonight." His voice was steady, almost too steady. I froze halfway to the fridge. "Her piano thing? That was tonight?" He finally looked at me. "Yeah, tonight." Guilt pricked at the back of my neck, but the instinct to defend myself kicked in before I could stop it. "I thought it was next week. I had the magazine interview." "Don't." He set the glass down hard enough that it rattled. "Don't start listing excuses. She looked for you in the crowd, twice." And then she stopped. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. "Marcus, I'm sorry. I really am. I'll talk to her tomorrow." He cut me off. "How many more moments do you plan to miss before it's too late?" The words landed heavier than I expected. I tried to hold his gaze, but it was like looking into a mirror I didn't want to see. "I'm under a lot of pressure right now," I said. "That feature in Cycle and Steel?" His laugh was sharp and humorless. "Right, the feature, the next build, the next show, always the next thing. You keep saying you're doing this for us, but we're not in it with you. You've left us behind, Owen." That got my back up. "That's not fair. Everything I've built means nothing if you're not here." His voice cracked just a little before he caught it. "You can't keep making promises you don't keep." I hated how familiar that sounded. My father used to tell me men didn't quit halfway. I'd turned it into a rule for everything. Projects, deals, even arguments. "I'll make it up to you," I said, softer now. "To them." Marcus shook his head, picked up the glass, and took a slow drink. "You can't keep buying time with promises." I didn't answer. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A client. I didn't pull it out, but I didn't turn it off either. The clock over the stove ticked louder than it should have. Finally, Marcus rinsed his glass, set it in the sink, and walked past me without another word. I stood there a long time, telling myself he was overreacting, that things would calm down after the article came out. But the truth was, the silence in that kitchen felt like the first hairline crack in a frame, invisible to the eye, but already spreading. The next morning, I decided I was going to fix things, not with talk, not with another "I'll make it up to you" speech, with action. I'd cook dinner, a full sit-down meal, the kind families in TV shows have. I left the shop early, hit the grocery store, and bought way too much: salmon fillets, asparagus, fresh bread, some kind of fancy lemon tart I figured would impress Marcus. I pictured all of us around the table, laughing, plates cleaned, tension gone. It started falling apart about 10 minutes in. The salmon stuck to the pan and tore apart when I tried to flip it. The asparagus burned on one side and stayed raw on the other. I forgot to preheat the oven for the bread. The kitchen smelled like smoke before I'd even set the table. By the time they all came in, I had the food plated in a way that almost hid the damage. Marcus raised an eyebrow at the spread. Naomi and Finn sat down without a word. "Thought we'd try something different tonight," I said, forcing a smile. Naomi glanced at Finn, then at Marcus. "It's Wednesday." "Yeah?" "It's burger night." Finn said flatly, like I'd just announced we were skipping Christmas. I froze, spatula still in my hand. Burger night? Marcus didn't even look at me. Every Wednesday for the past 3 years, the kids pick the toppings, we eat in the living room, watch a movie. Oh, I tried to laugh it off. Well, we can do that next week. Let's eat this while it's hot. They poked at the food. Naomi nibbled a corner of the salmon, then set her fork down. Finn just pushed his asparagus around. I tried small talk. So, school, Marcus cut in, his voice quiet but sharp. There's a lot you don't see, Owen. That shut me up. The words weren't loud, but they landed heavy. After a few more minutes of scraping forks and half-hearted bites, the kids excused themselves. No movie, no laughter. Just the sound of their doors closing upstairs. Marcus stood, gathered the plates, and put them in the sink without another word. He didn't even rinse them. Then he walked out of the kitchen, leaving me standing there in the wreck of my perfect dinner. I stared at the empty table, telling myself I'd tried. That effort had to count for something. But the truth was sitting right there in the cold food and untouched tart. The gap between what I thought my family needed and what they actually needed was wider than I'd ever bothered to notice. The sponsorship party was supposed to be a win, biggest deal my shop had ever landed, and I wanted everyone to see it. We cleared out the living room, hired a caterer, lined the counters with bottles of top-shelf whiskey and local craft beer. Every bike guy, investor, and industry contact I knew was crammed into our house. Marcus moved through the crowd with a tray of hors d'oeuvres, smiling politely but staying on the edges. I was in full performance mode, shaking hands, telling stories loud enough for people across the room to hear. When one of the sponsors asked who'd done the food, I spotted Marcus across the room and called out, "That's my in-house catering department. Comes with a side of eye rolls and unsolicited budget advice." A few chuckles from the group. It wasn't the gut punch from the expo, but the words landed wrong. I saw it in Marcus's eyes. The smile stayed on his face, but it was the kind you put on when you're already halfway out the door in your head. He didn't come over. He didn't make a scene. He just disappeared down the hall. I found him 20 minutes later in our bedroom, folding clothes into a duffel bag. "What are you doing?" I asked, still half smiling, like maybe this was some weird joke. He didn't look up. "Packing." "For what?" "For leaving." He zipped the bag. "I'm staying at my sister's." I laughed once, short, disbelieving. "Because of a comment? Marcus, come on." He stood straight, finally looking me in the eye. "It's not because of a comment. It's because this isn't working. Not for me. Not for the kids. Not anymore." I felt the room tilt, but I held my ground. "You're blowing this way out of—" "No," he cut in. "I've let this go on too long. You care more about the next contract, the next article, the next party, than you do about showing up for your own family." "That's not fair," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "Everything I do is for us?" "I know, I've heard it 100 times, but you can't just say it, Owen. You have to live it, and you don't." He slung the bag over his shoulder and walked past me. I followed him down the hall, the sound of the party still humming from the other side of the house. Naomi and Finn were in the living room, their eyes tracking Marcus as he bent to kiss them goodbye. Naomi's jaw tightened. Finn looked down at the floor. "Dad's staying with Aunt Claire for a while," Marcus told them. I wanted to say something, to stop this from happening in front of them, but the words stuck. Marcus opened the front door, turned back to me once. "Figure out what actually matters to you, Owen. Then maybe we can talk." The door shut behind him, and the sound of it cut through the party noise like a blade. The morning after the party, the house felt wrong. Too quiet, too still. No sound of the coffee grinder, no low hum of Marcus moving through the kitchen. Just the fridge clicking on and off, and the faint echo of my own footsteps. Marcus's side of the closet was empty. His jacket wasn't on the hook by the door. The kids' backpacks were gone too. I poured myself coffee I didn't want, and sat at the table. Naomi and Finn's cereal bowls weren't there. Their chairs were pushed in. It was like the whole place had been staged for a real estate showing. Clean, lifeless, stripped of us. I didn't hear from them that first day. The second morning, Naomi came by with Marcus to grab a few things for school. She barely looked at me. When Marcus went out to the car, she stayed behind for a second. "We were watching," she said quietly. I blinked. "What?" "At the party. We saw how you treated Dad." Her voice didn't shake, but it cut straight through me. You think we don't notice. We do. Before I could respond, she turned and walked out. Work didn't help. I sat in my office at the shop staring at invoices and design drafts like they were written in another language. The cycle and steel feature didn't matter. The sponsorship deal didn't matter. My phone buzzed with messages I didn't return. Then Finn's teacher called. She said he'd been withdrawn lately, quieter than usual, distracted. I heard the unspoken part in her tone. She was telling me he wasn't okay, and neither was I. That's when I booked a therapy appointment. Not because I wanted to, because I didn't know what else to do. The first few sessions, I sat there with my arms crossed, talking around the real stuff. Then, one Thursday afternoon, the therapist asked, "When was the last time you felt present with your family?" I didn't have an answer. That silence broke something open. The kids stayed with Marcus most weekends, but one Friday he texted to say they'd be with me for the next 2. When they came over, they barely spoke during dinner. After they went to bed, the house was so quiet I could hear the clock ticking in the hallway. By Sunday night, the silence had weight to it. I walked into the living room, turned on the TV, then turned it off again. I sat there in the dark and actually let myself feel it. The hollow space I'd carved out by choosing work over them. The emptiness of a house without the people who made it worth walking into. And for the first time, I understood this wasn't just a rough patch. This was the result of every choice I'd made, and I was the only one who could decide if it stayed this way. It was just after 9 when I heard the bathroom door click shut upstairs. At first I thought Naomi was just brushing her teeth late, but then I caught the faint sound of sniffling under the hum of the fan. I knocked lightly. "Naomi, you okay?" Silence for a beat, then a shaky, "I'm fine." I opened the door a crack. She was sitting on the closed toilet lid, knees pulled up, eyes red. "What happened?" I asked, stepping inside. She stared at the floor. "I got my period." "Oh." I froze, brain empty. "Okay, do you need anything?" She wiped her face with her sleeve. "I didn't want to bother you." That hit harder than it should have. "Why would you think you're bothering me?" Her voice was small but certain. "You're too busy." Marcus had said those exact words months ago. Hearing them from her felt like someone had kicked the air out of my chest. I crouched down in front of her. "Naomi, I'm here. Right now, I'm here. What do you need?" She hesitated, then shrugged. "Pads, and maybe a heating pad." My stomach hurts. I nodded, already moving. "Got it. I'll be right back." 15 minutes later, she was curled up on the couch under a blanket, sipping tea I'd made too hot, but she didn't complain. We watched some reality baking show in silence. Every few minutes, I'd glance over just to make sure she was still okay. At the first commercial break, I said, "Naomi, I'm sorry for a lot of things, but especially for making you think I wouldn't want to be here for this." She didn't look at me, but she didn't pull away either. Okay. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a start. When she went to bed, I didn't go back to my laptop like I normally would. I went straight to my home office, turned on the light, and stood there looking at the walls lined with framed magazine spreads, sponsorship plaques, and photos of bikes that had eaten years of my life. I started taking them down, one by one. The desk got cleared next. Old design sketches, invoices, project notes, all in boxes. I made a pile for donation, another for the trash. By midnight, the room felt lighter, like I could actually breathe in it. Then I pulled out a notebook and started writing. 1 letter for Naomi. 1 for Finn. 1 for Marcus. Not rehearsed speeches, not excuses, just the truth about where I came from, what I'd gotten wrong, and what I wanted to change. When I capped the pen, my hand ached. But for the first time in a long time, the ache felt like progress. Saturday afternoon, Marcus pulled into the driveway with the kids. Naomi hopped out first, backpack slung over one shoulder, Finn trailing behind her with his usual slow shuffle. Marcus stayed in the driver's seat, engine still running. I stepped out onto the porch. "Can you all come in for a minute? I need to talk to you." Naomi's eyes narrowed, suspicious. Finn glanced at Marcus, who finally cut the engine and got out. 5 minutes, he said. We ended up in the living room, the 4 of us. I'd set the letters on the coffee table in a neat stack. My hands felt too big, too clumsy as I picked up the first one. "I wrote something for each of you," I started. "It's not excuses, it's just the truth about me. about what I've done wrong. Marcus crossed his arms. The kids sat on the couch, stiff as boards. I read Naomi's letter first. How I'd grown up in a house where feelings were treated like weakness. How I'd thought providing was the same thing as being present. How I'd missed her recitals, her inside jokes, the way she's grown into someone with her own voice, and how I was done missing anything else. Her eyes stayed on the floor, but her grip on her backpack loosened. Then Finn's. I told him I was proud of him, not just for what he did well, but for how he handled things when they didn't go right, something I'd never learned as a kid. I told him I wanted to be there for his games, his projects, even the boring stuff. He blinked hard a few times, pretending to scratch his face. Last was Marcus's. I didn't look at him when I read it. I talked about my father's voice in my head, the fear of failing, the way I'd chased control so hard I'd squeezed him and the kids out. I told him I was sorry for making him feel invisible in his own home, and I meant it. When I finished, the room was quiet except for the faint ticking of the wall clock. Naomi spoke first, barely above a whisper. "You didn't used to talk like this." "I didn't used to listen like this," I said. Finn leaned into Naomi's side. She didn't push him away. Marcus stayed quiet for a long moment, then said, "Words are easy, Owen. Change isn't." "I know," I said. "I'm not asking you to trust me today. I'm asking you to watch me, and I'll earn it." He studied me, eyes searching for the performance he'd seen 100 times before. Finally, he gave the smallest nod. The kids didn't smile, but they didn't bolt for the door either. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep them in the room. The Monday after that talk, I walked into the shop and handed the lead designer my calendar. "Block out the next 2 Fridays," I told her, "and take the lead on the Thompson build. It's yours." She stared at me like I'd grown a second head. "You sure?" "Yeah, you've got it." Saying it out loud felt like setting down a weight I'd been carrying for years. At home that week, Finn had a science project due, some Rube Goldberg contraption with marbles and pulleys. Normally, I would have taken over, turned it into an engineering marvel. This time, I sat on the floor with him. Let him decide where things went. Halfway through, one of the ramps collapsed. He looked up, waiting for me to take control. I just said, "Guess we rebuild it." He grinned, actually grinned, and we started over. It worked, not perfectly, but it was his. That Friday, I showed up at Naomi's drama club event early enough to get a front row seat. She spotted me from the stage, did a double take, and then tried to hide a smile. When her solo came, I couldn't stop the tears. I didn't care who saw. After the show, she walked over with her friends. "This is my dad," she said. Not Owen Sharp, custom bike guy. Dad. That word felt better than any title I'd ever earned. Marcus noticed too. The next week, he suggested we try a couples therapy session. I agreed before he could change his mind. Therapy wasn't smooth. I hated half the questions, and he hated half my answers. We argued about old fights we'd both pretended to forget. But we kept going back. One night after a session, Marcus and I were unloading groceries in my kitchen. He handed me a bag of apples and said, "You've changed more in the last 2 months than in the last 10 years. I didn't know if that was a compliment or a warning. "I'm not done changing," I said. We had fights, sure. There were nights the kids shut their bedroom doors a little harder than necessary. But there were also nights when we ate together without tension hanging over the table. The real difference was I showed up. Even when it was inconvenient, even when work was calling, I kept showing up, and little by little, they started meeting me halfway. 6 months later, I woke up on a Saturday with no plan and told everyone to pack a bag. "Where are we going?" Finn asked, halfway down the stairs with his hoodie half on. "Surprise," I said. "Just trust me." 3 hours later, we were in a little lakeside town east of Seattle, the kind with 1 diner, 2 antique shops, and water so still it looked painted on. We grabbed fish and chips from a shack on the dock, grease soaking through the paper, and sat with our legs dangling over the water. Naomi laughed so hard at something Finn said that she snorted, a sound I hadn't heard in years. After lunch, we rented 4 old cruiser bikes and spent the afternoon riding around the lake. No schedule, no stopwatch in my head. Just the sound of the tires crunching gravel and the occasional splash of a duck hitting the water. By evening, we'd found a little fire pit outside the cabin we'd rented. I lit it while Marcus brought out marshmallows and cocoa. The kids argued over the right way to roast a marshmallow. Naomi swore by slow rotation. Finn preferred lighting his on fire. Marcus leaned back in his chair, watching them, the firelight catching in his eyes. We told stories, some true, some ridiculous. Naomi did an impression of me from years ago, pacing with my phone glued to my ear. And everyone laughed, even me. At some point, Marcus reached over and took my hand. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. The pressure of his fingers around mine said enough. I sat there, fire warming my face, the sound of my kids bickering and laughing filling the air, and felt something settle in me. Control was never power. This was power. This was freedom.